What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright. Deuteronomy chapter 21. A lot more subsections than the previous couple of chapters, but I'm still assuming that these are, instructions Moses is giving to the younger Israelites before they go into the Promised Land regarding how God wants them to live and engage in certain things. Like, I say engage in certain things because the last chapter was about war and how they were to, attack or not their enemies. But, yeah. Let's hop in. Deuteronomy chapter 21. Here we go. When you are in the land the Lord your God is giving you, someone may be found murdered in a field, and you don't know who committed the murder. In such a case, your elders and judges must measure the distance from the site of the crime to the nearby towns. When the nearest town has been determined, that town's elders must select from the herd a heifer that has never been trained or yoked to a plow. They must lead it down to a valley that has not been plowed or planted, and that has a stream running through it. There in the valley they must break the heifer's neck. Then the Levitical priests must step forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister before him and to pronounce blessings in the Lord's name. They are to decide all legal and criminal cases. Okay. It's not yet stated what the purpose of breaking the heifer's neck is. I think I might just read the next few verses and then try and get some more thoughts on it. So verse 6. The elders of the town must wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken. Then they must say, "Our hands did not shed this person's blood, nor did we see it happen. O Lord, forgive your people Israel whom you have redeemed. Do not charge your people with the guilt of murdering an innocent person." Then they will be absolved of the guilt of this person's blood. By following these instructions, you will do what is right in the Lord's sight, and will cleanse the guilt of murder from your community. So, I guess in lieu of being able to find the murderer, you don't want to take some random person's life, because that just worsens the problem. So I guess as, somewhat of a substitute for that, but also as, almost as a goodwill offering to God, that the heifer's neck is broken, obviously killing it, and basically it's like, alright, God, we can't really figure out who did this, but we want things to still be right with you, God. So we're doing this. We're sacrificing at least something of value as sort of a replacement of that. Please don't be angry with your people as a whole, because if they would have just let it slide knowingly, no, that's not, God is not okay with murder, as has been stated multiple times leading up to this point in the Bible. So, yeah, I guess really it's just they're trying to make up for the punishment that they find themselves unable to enact, and still trying to keep things right with God, even if they can't necessarily make it right with the victim's family. As to why they would figure out the nearest town, I guess it's just because that's probably the most likely place where that person would be from, potentially. I'm not totally sure if that's the reason, but also, like, deciding on the nearest town makes sure that they're not just, like, arbitrarily choosing some town that, like, would have an outright favoritism one way or the other in, trying to determine a ruling on this case or whatever. Okay. Moving on to verse 10. Suppose you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God hands them over to you, and you take some of them as captives. And suppose you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you are attracted to her and want to marry her. If this happens, you may take her to your home, where she must shave her head, cut her nails, and change the clothes she was wearing when she was captured. She will stay in your home, but let her mourn for her father and mother for a full month. Then you may marry her, and you will be her husband, and she will be your wife. But if you marry her, and she does not please you, you must let her go free. You may not sell her or treat her as a slave, for you have humiliated her. It doesn't mention anything about whether or not the woman is previously married. I don't know if it would have been assumed that, like, if she was already married. Well, because if they would have gone out to war against enemies, they would have killed all the men anyway. So, even if she was married, she's not anymore. But, yeah, I'm definitely not going to say that this is right or preferred, but it was within the practices of peoples of that day. This also might still be kind of an extension of, like, really, really early, all the way back in Genesis command of, being fruitful and multiplying. But, yeah. Nowadays, that would be seen as probably not great. Especially in most, like, Western cultures in particular. Really, a lot of more, developed society in this day and age kind of frowns upon polygamy. Although, it doesn't specifically mention that the man is married prior to this. So, but I'm assuming it could be either or, like, and if the man is already married, that's kind of more so what I'm thinking through. Obviously, less frowned upon if the man is not already married. I don't know if the thought process of that day was more so just like, well, better multiple wives than adultery? I don't know. Anyway. But given other statements, especially in the New Testament, it's assumed in this day and age that Christians, at least, shouldn't really have more than one wife. Or spouse. Let's broaden it even a little more. Especially if you're going to be in leadership. But that's kind of an unnecessary caveat, I think. So, that's just how it was. But the point of the whole shaving her head, cutting her nails, and that kind of stuff. I assume that's meant to be sort of a reset. I mean, it might be, okay, so now she's not carrying any of, previous, or at least not as much of previous things from, her former home. But also, having her stay in the home for a month to mourn her father and mother. I mean, the father presumably would have been dead. Mother, possibly not, but even still, getting married in this context, that generally is like, okay, you're living here now in this house, not with your parents. So, yeah, thus the month before actually getting married. Okay. I think that's all my thoughts related to that. So I'll move along. Verse 15. Suppose a man has 2 wives, but he loves one and not the other, and both have given him sons. And suppose the firstborn son is the son of the wife he does not love. When the man divides his inheritance, he may not give the larger inheritance to his younger son, the son of the wife he loves, as if he were the firstborn son. He must recognize the rights of his oldest son, the son of the wife he does not love, by giving him a double portion. He is the first son of his father's virility, and the rights of the firstborn belong to him. Pretty simple there. Firstborn child rights don't change just because a man prefers one wife over another. Not much else to say there. And it specifically mentions the double portion of the inheritance being given to the firstborn. That was, part of the firstborn son's rights. Okay. Moving on to verse 18. Suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or mother, even though they discipline him. In such a case, the father and mother must take the son to the elders as they hold court at the town gate. The parents must say to the elders, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious and refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of his town must stone him to death. In this way you will purge this evil from among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. Now, being a rebellious son doesn't automatically assume glutton and drunkard. So I don't know if that's, the exact words of what they specifically had to say, or if it was just hey, you need to give some detail on how he's being stubborn and rebellious. Because, saying that he's a glutton and a drunkard, if he's not, just because he's being rebellious, makes no sense to me. So I think I think the intent there is more so, don't just say that he's stubborn and rebellious, give some examples of how. So then it can be determined that, yeah, okay, son is definitely being rebellious, or maybe not, because it doesn't say this, but I also wonder if they might go through some sort of discernment process to verify the truthfulness of this claim. But yeah, also just noting that it mentions that he's still rebellious after they discipline him. If he's stubborn and rebellious without being disciplined, then, like, come on. You've basically just... You're not giving him any disincentive from what he's doing. Also, it specifically says son, not daughter. Culture was different then. Daughters might not have had as much leeway on some things to really be stubborn and rebellious in the first place. But I think nowadays the general concept of, like, you know, giving discipline when a child is rebellious, like, that I think applies to any children, not just sons. Also, I wouldn't necessarily suggest trying to go about a similar process and punishment to this in the modern day. I mean, still possibly seek out some counsel, and even, you know, maybe consult your pastor or somebody like that on what the punishment should be or whatever. But generally speaking, I mean, in the case of significantly being rebellious, today I think it's more so on the parents to, you know, figure out the discipline, the punishment, and be able to handle that. At least, you know, up to the point where the son is an adult, and then it's fairly common to say, okay, you're an adult now, get out. But again, this is assuming the child is being stubborn and rebellious. I'm not saying kick him out for no good reason. Anywho, okay. Moving on to verse 22. Let's wrap up this chapter. If someone has committed a crime worthy of death and is executed and hung on a tree, the body must not remain hanging from the tree overnight. You must bury the body that same day, for anyone who is hung is cursed in the sight of God. In this way, you will prevent the defilement of the land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession. So, tell you what, let me look at the footnotes here. First one where it says, and hung on a tree, could have been impaled on a pole, which is definitely a bit different. But also, I think the broader idea might be like, hey, don't let a dead body out to just sit there and decay out in the open. Because that will, you know, have effects on the surrounding land. Also, I mean, then there's this second part where it's like, anyone who's hung is cursed in the sight of God. Let's check on that footnote there. Greek version reads, for everyone who is hung on a tree. Okay. Rather than just being hung. Okay. This specified on a tree, so it's kind of assumed on a tree, but, like, I wonder if they felt it necessary to add the footnote in there, just in case somebody doesn't make that assumption. Because otherwise people might take that out of context and say, oh, well, if someone gets, you know, hung on a noose of any kind or anything like that, then they're cursed in God's sight, just outright. Yeah, again, I don't necessarily know what all situations are and are not supposed to be included in this. But yeah. Also, it says executed and hung on a tree. I don't know if that's supposed to be like executed by hanging on a tree. Because why would you go through the effort of hanging somebody up after executing them? I mean, unless you're just trying to scare people. But in any case, I think the general point of burying the body that same day is supposed to be not letting the decaying body, you know, out in the open. So, would be nice to have a little more detail on, you know, the applicable situations and why such a person is cursed in God's eyes, but I can't say I really know that one for sure. If you have any ideas related to that, feel free to let me know however you can when you watch this. But yeah, don't think I really have any other thoughts there. So I guess that'll do it for Deuteronomy 21. Okay, so chapter 21, honestly, it had like 5 different subcategories just for different kinds of commands in there. So, like, kind of all over the place to some extent. I mean, it covered unsolved murder, marrying a captive woman, rights of the firstborn son, especially when dealing with multiple wives. Rebellious sons. Okay, so at least there were 2 that had relatively the same topic. Sons. And then just some other random stuff at the end. Like, yeah. Sometimes this happens, though, where it just kind of gets into a whole bunch of not necessarily thematically related commands. But that doesn't make them any less important, or at least it didn't for the Israelites at that time. Nowadays, we're not necessarily expected to follow all of these, but just for context and knowing what all was asked of the Israelites of Old Testament times in this context, kind of helpful to know, just so like other stuff later on might make more sense. But anyway, I digress. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. You can also follow me on Rumble or any of the social media pages linked down in the description. And underneath the description there, leave comments with any thoughts you have. Anyway, okay, so that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.